right, grade 6. So we are continuing with our big idea. Understanding improper fractions, mixed numbers, ratios, and percent helps us to describe and compare quantities. Now today we're focusing on the comparing part, being able to compare mixed numbers and improper fractions. This is lesson 3 of unit 5 in your textbook. So when we have a mixed number and an improper fraction and we need to compare and see which is more or less, it's difficult to do when they are both in different forms. So here we have an example. Kenda watched a TV program for 1.5 hours. Garnet watched 5 half-hour programs. So that would be our improper fraction, 5 half hours compared to 1.5 hours. In order to compare, your best option is always to make them as similar as possible. So make them both into either improper fractions or both into mixed fractions. Doesn't matter really which one you choose. I'm going to make them both into improper fractions. So I know one group of 2 is 2 plus one more is 3. So that's the same as 3 half hours compared to 5 half hours, which means then Garnet watched more. All right, here are 3 strategies students use to compare 2 1/4, 2/3, and 11/6. They used a number line. And we'll talk about a couple of other strategies as well. But here we have Ella, who's using benchmarks to estimate. And benchmarks, again, is it closer to 1/2? Is it closer to 1? Is it closer to 0? Is it more than, in this case, 2, and so on. So we've got 0, we've got 1/2, we've got 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and finally 3, because we've got more than 2 here, so we go all the way to 3. So she's got 2/3, which is close to 1/2 but slightly bigger. And then she has 11/6. Well, if we have 6, 2 groups of 6 is 12, so that's really close to 2. 2 1/4 is going to be between 2 and 2.5. So now she can compare and say, well, 2 1/4 is largest, 11/6 is in the middle, and 2/3 is smallest. Or we can use number lines still, but this time we're going to create 3 number lines of equal length. This was very similar to the fraction strips you did in grade 5, except now instead of doing a strip, they're doing a line, but that's the only difference. Same thing again is that your strips have to be the same length. So each of the 3 has to be the same length, so you can compare them as much the same as possible, remember. And again, 1 to 3 for each of them. Equal labeling for the 1, the 2, and the 3 spots. And then in between, it would change depending on what your denominator is. So here we have 4, so we're going to divide this into 4 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4 parts to make 1, another 1, 2, 3, 4 parts to make 2, another 1, 2, 3, 4 parts to make 3. Again, remember, each of those parts has to be equal in size. So we cannot have a number line that's drawn like this. Again, going up to there, and there, and there, and there, and have this be divided into 4 parts like this is okay. They're fairly equal, but if I were to go like this, now they're not equal, and that is no longer a good number line. So you have to be careful when you're drawing your number lines. Might be a really good idea to use a unit on your ruler. So like make each section 1 centimeter, or make each section 1/2 centimeter, or something of that nature. All right, so here 2 1/4 is between 2 and 3, 2 1/4, make that 1/4. Here, because we're thirds, we're dividing each section into groups of 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on. 2/3, well, that's not even 1, so that's at the 2/3 point. And here we're dividing each section into 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because we have 6 here. Then we count to 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And remember, you don't count the 0 line. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11, 6. And then you can easily compare it. This is the most, this is the middle one, and this is the smallest one. My personal favorite is creating equivalent fractions using the same denominator. Remember, the denominator is the bottom number. Now, this is where it can get tricky because we had different bottom numbers. We had 2 and 1/4. Oops, sorry. So 4 being one denominator. We had 2/3. 3 being another denominator, and we had 11/6, 6 being our other denominator. So we need a number that all of those can be multiplied to equal. So we need a multiple, really. Multiples of 4, 3, and 6. Well, 4 and 3 is 12. 6 and 2 is 12. They could all have the denominator of 12, which would make them easy to compare. Now, first of all, I would need to take my mixed number and make it into an improper fraction. So I'd go 2 groups of 4 is 8, plus 1 more is 9, so that would make it 9/4 here. So 9/4 I'm going to make into something out of 12. And remember, when we create equivalent fractions, we multiply or divide the same number from the top and the bottom. So I'm going to multiply by 3. 9 times 3 is 27. 4 times 3 is 12. Remember, we want them all having 12 as our bottom number. So 27/12 for 9/4. 2/3, I'm now going to have to multiply by 4 on each because I remember I want this to equal 12. I want that bottom number to be the same. 3 times 4 is 12. 2 times 4 is 8. So 8/12 would be the fraction for 2/3. 11/6, again, I want this to equal 12. So this time I'm going to multiply by 2. 11 times 2 is 22. 6 times 2 is 12. So now I have 3 new fractions. I have 27/12. Let's make this a different color. 27/12, 8/12, and 22/12. Now it's really easy. 27 is the biggest, 22 is the middle, and 8 is the smallest. And because they all have the same bottom number, I only have to compare the top number, which I find the easiest thing to do. All right, you're going to do some to practice. So let's start with these numbers here. Press pause and compare those on your paper using whichever strategy you prefer. All right, let's take a look. So I'm going to use equivalent fractions because that's the one that I like the best. And once I look at my bottom numbers, I have 6, I have 2, I have 4, I have 3, and I have 12. I usually look at the biggest one first. Is there any way that I can make all of the other ones into 12? Well, 6 times 2 is 12, 2 times 6 is 12, 4 times 3 is 12, and 3 times 4 is 12. So I'm going to make them all into equivalent fractions having a denominator of 12. So 1/6, in order to make it out of 12, I have to multiply by 2. What I do to the top, I do to the bottom, or what I do to the bottom, sorry, I do to the top. 6 times 2 would be 12, 1 times 2 would be 2. So that's what 1/6 would be. 1/2, half of 12 I know is 6. Or I can go 2 times 6 is 12, 1 times 6 is 6, so it's 6/12. 1 3/4 is tricky because it is a mixed number, so I'm going to make it into an improper fraction so it's easier to work with. 1 times 4 is 4, plus 3 is 7, so that would be 7/4. To make it into something out of 12, 4 times what is 12? 4 times 3 is 12. What I do to the bottom, I also have to do to the top. So 7 times 3, so that'd be 21/12. Okay, so these are the ones that I'm ending up with here. I have 1 and 1/3, also a mixed number. I'm going to make it into an improper fraction. 1 times 3 is 3, plus 1 is 5, so that's 5/3. To get to 12, I'm going to multiply by 4 to the top and the bottom. 5 times 4 is 20, so 20/12 is my new fraction there. And then I have 11/12, which I don't actually have to do anything to because it's already out of 12. So then I know my largest fraction is 21/12. My second largest fraction is 20/12. Then 11/12 and 6/12 and 2/12. So there we go. They were actually in order from largest to smallest. All right, we're going to practice by using question number 4 in your textbook. It has 1/2, 23/8, and 1 3/4 as what we are comparing. It says to use centimeter grid paper, draw a number line, but you can use whatever strategy you prefer. So go ahead and press pause and try now to find these fractions in order from, let's go smallest to largest this time. And you can use whichever strategy you want. You could use this number line if you'd like, or you can use equivalent fractions, whichever you prefer. Press pause and try it now on your paper. All right, let's take a look. So we have 1/2, 23/8, and 1 3/4. We're going to use the number line. I'm going to use this one just because it's already there for us, and it's a good idea for us to try one with the number line. So first we have 1/2. Well, that's really easy. It's half of 1. So that's 1/2 right there. Okay. Then we have 1 3/4. So what they've done is they've divided it into fourths. So 1 3/4. Well, 1, 2, 3. Here we go. 3/4. So that's 1 3/4. Make my one a little bigger. 23/8. Now this is where it gets tricky. Here they've divided into fourths, which means then in order to get eighths, I'm actually going to have to take each section and divide it into 2 to make those eighths. So 1 would be 8. 2 would be 2 groups of 8, which would be 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So it would be right here, very close to 8. That can be tricky. I could also make them all into equivalent fractions. So I'm going to show you how to do that one again because that can be a little tricky. I'm going to see what equivalent number I can use, what multiple I can use. Well, I'm going to look at my largest one, 8. 2 times 4 is 8, 4 times 2 is 8. I can make them all into equivalent fractions out of 8. So 23/8 stays the same. 1/2 into something out of 8. Well, to get to 8, I would multiply by 4. So 1 times 4, so 4/8. So we'd have 4/8, 23/8, which stays the same. 1 3/4 is tricky. I have to make it into a mixed number, or sorry, improper fraction from a mixed number. 1 times 4 is 4, plus 1 is 7, so it would be 7/4. 7/4 into out of 8, which means I'd have to multiply by 2, top and bottom. 7 times 2 is 14, so it would be 14/8. So smallest to largest, 4/8, 14/8, and 23/8. Or 1/2, 7/4, and 23/8 in order. All right, you got to move on to your concept practice now, where you are comparing mixed and improper fractions. It's from your textbook, page 173 to 175. You are working on numbers 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 12. Make sure that you are always showing your work for all of those questions. And again, some of you tend to forget your textbooks or your pages and your numbers. 3 to 5 here, 6 to 7 here. 8 to 11 are here. 12, 13, and then your reflect prompt if you need those. Remember, as you are working, if you have questions that you ask myself, a classmate, or one of the helpers in the classroom. Good luck!